I want to jump into house prices because the podcast Generation Uncharted, and it's a show within that podcast, house price has been a really big topic. And experts are basically saying that the house prices are continuing to fall. They're blaming a lot of it on Rachel Reeves and all of the kind of speculation around the budget. But the budget's happened now, but the house prices still continue to go down, especially in London. And I gotta be honest, I'm seeing this in my own life now. Of a few people I know that are trying to sell properties, basically saying it's a disaster.
Yeah.
What is your take on how? Because here's my thing. I'm like, well, is this a reckoning in the sense of? And I was talking about this with someone else the other day. Like, a house around the area where I live is about £800,000 for like a standard house. And I was like, to be honest, if I'm going to spend almost £1,000,000, I want a jacuzzi. I need a walk-in wardrobe. Where's the swimming pool? Like, and maybe my growing up in the 90s where houses were like 40, 60K for what is now effectively £800,000.
Yeah.
But that concept hasn't gone away. If I'm going to spend £1,000,000 on the house, it's going to have to be spectacular. And so I'm like, I don't think these houses are worth this amount of money anyway. Obviously, it's harsh for people that have bought houses that like, but hold on, I bought this and now it's getting less valuable. You just bought a house. Where do you stand on all this?
I did literally just buy a house in November. Luckily, we sold our house in kind of June, July before this all started to happen. So it didn't impact us, I should say. I think it's super interesting to see how this plays out. Obviously, it can just be a blip, right? Like, I think from a financial forecasting perspective, which I am not one, you would need to see this kind of decline play out over multiple quarters before you could argue that house prices are kind of going to continue to fall. But to your point, we as a generation, it's going to be, we're the hardest generation, and maybe the generation below us will be the same, to try and get onto that property ladder. As the increase in the value of properties and how much it costs to buy a property in 2025 now into 2026 has far outstripped that of the salaries that people are getting paid. I think there are charts out there, which I'm sure you could find, where they show the median salary versus the median value of a house over the years, and the difference between them now is, or the multiplier between them now is greater than it's ever been. Fact check me on that, because I may be incorrect.
No, I think it's like in the 90s, the average house was 3 times the average salary. And nowadays, fact check me, but I think it's either 12 or 13 times the average salary now, which is ridiculous.
Yes, and that needs to be fixed, right? Because you do, obviously people don't need to own a property. You speak to a lot of financial advisors and they may advise against it. There are pros and cons to owning a property versus renting a property. So in no way am I saying, we need to fix this because everybody should own a house. But people should have the opportunity to own a property if that's what they want to do. And a lot of people now, they're relying on either, some kind of level of inheritance to get onto that property ladder, or they have to take out a mortgage that's on incredibly unfavorable terms for them that they're then, tied to. There's higher risk with it because it, as it compares to their salary. So I do think if, you look at the general feeling right now that a lot of people have in the public around kind of our finances, the affordability of life in general, I do feel like it needs to be, so easy for me to say, it needs to be solved, because it does need to be solved, and people need to have the opportunity to. And I'm not saying one area needs to be corrected, right? Either salaries need to be adjusted. We need to look at like how are we paying people to ensure they can get onto the property ladder. What schemes are we putting in place, like the Help to Buy schemes that have existed in the past that allow people to get onto the property ladder? Because it is a big moment in a lot of people's lives. People want to get onto that property ladder and have the opportunity to own their house. So I'm super interested to see how this plays out. To your point, is this some kind of reckoning that we will see house prices drop dramatically? Selfishly as a property owner, I don't know how well that works out for people like me. But, there needs to be some kind of an adjustment that happens. I saw something very interesting recently, which was, I think it was Jimmy Carr on a podcast, but I could be completely wrong. It was a comedian, and they were talking about the fact that one way to try and solve some of this inequality is that people wouldn't have to pay taxes, say, in their 20s. So if you're in your 20s, you just don't pay taxes. And I thought that's actually an economics professor would be able to look into this to say if this actually worked. But it's a very interesting approach, because then in your 20s, you have your time to save for your deposit on your property. You have time to pay off your student loan if you went to university. You have opportunity to kind of make yourself more financially secure than when you get into your 30s and 40s, when a lot of people have figured out their lives a little bit. They tend to have transitioned into the job that's going to become their career. They tend to be a little bit more stable. I thought that was a really super interesting approach that I would love to see some politicians discussing that, because, the way we live our lives hasn't really changed much in the last, in my time being politically conscious, as far as kind of those big moments, how we pay taxes, how we work, the 5-day working week, all these things that some people to start to discuss should be revisited. And I think how we tax individuals to help them have a fair start in life is an interesting one to look at. But then an
No,
economics professor will tell me I'm talking garbage.
no, something needs to change, right?
Yeah.
My theory on all of this is I think that technology will change it. Much
Yeah.
like technology has changed all of our lives, the only two areas technology has not really touched at the moment is politics. They have a theory on that too, and housing.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the Nordic countries now, they're looking at sort of prefab houses, like basically almost you print the houses off and pop them together almost like IKEA furniture, which makes them movable, but you can make them out of material that's more insulated. Obviously, you've got a machine that's printing these off, so that will never tire. This idea of how we build houses with bricks and mortar, it's a concept, much like owning a home is a concept. You can't take it with you. So, effectively, it's never yours forever anyway. I think that we would need to get over some of those concepts. But actually, I think that once a couple of influential people saw, and I think it would tie in with how we've been raised, right? Because it would be a bit like The Sims, as in you could probably design the house yourself.
Yeah.
An expert would check it, put the plugs where it needs to go. You'd agree it. They'd print it. You would decide where in the UK to put it. And I think that something like that may happen. I know that there's something similar Elon Musk is looking at, but there's also something the Nordic countries are looking at. So I'm like, well, if this seems like it's something in the ether that maybe I should get some stocks and shares in, because I really think that might solve it. I don't know how quickly that stuff will come online, but I think that I could see that working, where it's like, I designed this house myself, like it's in The Sims. We've moved it here because actually a load of people are putting these kind of houses here, and we got really good ground rates. And if they put the prices up, we just literally call them, they collapse the house, they move it somewhere else, and Bob's your uncle. I don't know. I think that there might be something in that.
Yeah, I think it is trying to find quicker, more affordable ways to build houses. I think is probably where the real task lies. And to your point, that's going to lie in technology in some way, shape, or form. Technology continues to change the way we do everything. You mentioned Elon Musk, obviously, for his incredible sins. What he did for the EV market and electric cars was incredible. And the fact that, you could argue a lot of the adoption we now see across all the kind of EV car manufacturers is because of how well Tesla did in those kind of early days.
So you don't have to like him, but you can't deny his achievements. The man may just get us to Mars.
Yeah,
it is what it is. And just to say, by the way, those houses that I was talking about in like the Nordic countries, they look beautiful. They look like something out of Desperate Housewives. So it's where it's like, oh, I'd love to live in like a beautiful house that's made out of a sustainable material that's more insulating, and I created the house myself, and it was PK. Like, I think that if we could get to that, then that would be over. And I understand there are a lot of people that would be sad about the value of their house dropping, but I think it's always going to happen, because if we can't keep that, and also I do think, not you, but there is a special place in hell for people that brought their houses in like the 90s for a bag of jelly babies and like a sixpence, and now it's worth like £750,000, and each year they were there clapping, being like, yay, look at our investment. It's like, but if you could barely scrape together the bag of jelly beans, like, how did you think your kids were going to be able to do that? So where I'm like, I don't really have a lot, like, people that are buying their houses now, I understand how hard it is, but people that bought their houses then, I don't really have sympathy for it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly, like we just touched on, it's so hard to get onto the property ladder now. And I do think, to your point, things need to change. I think there's a lot of things in our lives that now we are starting to get to this point where society is reflecting the fact that things haven't worked for certain generations, right? We're seeing this in politics, where we are seeing the emergence of certain political parties and political leaders because the traditional just hasn't worked, and people feel out of touch with it. People feel out of touch with the way that British politics works today in the Houses of Parliament, with this kind of yaying and naying at each other, and people just don't like it. It doesn't feel human to them. So we are seeing this, and we're the generation that has the opportunity to do that, to say, how could you improve politics? How could you improve housing to allow more people to engage with politics, which they should do, and more people to go onto the property ladder, which is incredibly important to a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people. So I think we have that opportunity.
Me too. I mean, I'm a big fan and keep talking about digital democracy. I really think that there's no reason now with all the technology we have that we couldn't all have a government app on our phones and every quarter certain things are put to us and we
Yeah.
vote. I think that because Brexit was so divisive, like people don't want to do voting anymore. But I'm like, no, but we went after something that was so ambitious and big and also involved other people. But domestic policy, like if you would say, do you support this energy policy? Would you like us to go, more in on nuclear, more in on renewable, whatever? And you just put it to the people. And it's like, okay, the people decided. Because I think the thing that gets me about politics now is people can come in, do untold damage. Like, look at Liz Truss, there for like 2 weeks. And we're still dealing with the trouble. But she's allowed to go off. It's not like we put them in prison if they get something wrong. So to me, it's like we either put them in prison if they get it wrong, or we put some of this stuff to the people. And then if it's wrong, it's like, well, fine, we all got it wrong. But I really hate politicians that come in now that say like, oh, well, we've got a mandate to do all of these things. Like, no, you didn't. You were just the least worst option. Like, no one supports this policy that you've got. And we're seeing that with stuff like digital ID, where it's like we've got left and right coming together being like, no one wants this, it wasn't in your manifesto, what are you talking about? It doesn't work. So I do think, again, maybe technology is the key, where if we can all vote on not everything, but some of the bigger, and I think more local issues as well. If there's going to be a new park, maybe everyone should be able to go online and vote, like we want this swing set and we want that, and that's got the most votes, and so that's how the money's going to be used or whatever. And obviously there'd be kinks that needs to be worked out, but I don't see, in an age where we can all go on X or Twitter and have our say, I don't see why we can't all go on a government app and have more of a say in the way that our lives are run.
Yeah, I also think, for something like that to work, you would need to be a lot more transparent with the kind of the pros and cons of anything that we do, right? The world we live in right now is, Brexit is an example of this. That was such a complex issue that the vast majority of us could never have sat down and actually thought through every single aspect of the impact of it, the economics of it all. It was such an incredibly complex topic to ask, the entire population of one country to vote on. But had there been more neutral opinions and information on what Brexit would do, here's what the impact could be on X, Y, Z, then I think you could trust the general population to make more of those decisions, or at least influence those decisions, right? You would maybe have a position where this is more about getting opinion than votes. So we want to get the opinion of the general public on this new park that we're planning on putting in your town. We want to get some opinions on it versus we want everyone to vote on whether that park should be there or not, because often there's so much dynamic to it that, I have time to sit there and spend 3 or 4 hours reading a white paper on the pros and cons of this park being put in? Probably not. And would I sit there and listen to a half-hour podcast on why this park should be here? I definitely would. So I think you need to find ways to reach people. And that's why I talk about you need to help people engage with politics now. I think politics feels so out of touch to so many of us. Like, when I sit there and I watch kind of these debates happening in Parliament, and it's just the way they treat each other, this kind of like, old schoolboy kind of way of yaying and naying at each other, I find it kind of really cringe. Like, it just doesn't connect with me, and therefore I switch off from it. We need to look at how do you actually engage every generation in politics, because it is really important. To your point, it is what will shape our future. Brexit has shaped our future and will continue to shape our future. The decisions that politicians make, Liz Truss coming in and dropping a budget, the impact that's had for years to come. So there has to be some more engagement with it. People have to understand what they're voting for when they have the opportunities to vote. And I do agree with you, some level of polling, voting, where people had the opportunity to lend their voice to different options. There's a great podcast, The Rest is Politics, which they talked about some of these different models that can exist where you bring groups together and they work on certain projects, certain initiatives, and then they give their opinion to the politicians that will ultimately make the decision. But you brought in the general public, a bit like jury duty, right? You bring people in for a 2-week stint where they are there to learn about a certain topic and then come to some sort of informed view on that topic. That then, because it's 12 people from all different backgrounds, all different parts of the country, the politicians can take that into account when they're then planning how do they move forward. Because otherwise, certain voices rise to the top. We see this with how, not to go on a soapbox on it, but you see this with how trans people are being treated right now. Certain voices are coming to the top on that conversation versus trans voices, which are often hidden from that conversation. So how do you actually get, and I've always been of the opinion, just to use that as an example, if you polled the vast majority of the UK, that not many people, definitely the vast majority in my opinion, have no problem with trans people using the bathroom that they feel most comfortable using, as an example. So if you could poll the public and actually see that is the general sentiment, then any kind of anti-trans legislation that might come in, it's clear that's going against the opinion of the British public. But right now, how do you actually engage at a political level the British public's opinion?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to have you back at some point to talk about all of this, because we just spent too long on the entertainment stuff. One more story I want to get to before we wrap.